You know that Christmas is my favorite time of year, and it's never too early to start thinking about what you're going to be creating for your Christmas atmosphere this year. So today I've gathered some great Christmas DIYs to get you inspired for the season.
Watch out for reindeers are falling down. We stay up waiting for Santa tonight. He climbs down the chimney at the speed of light.
Now for this first DIY, I'm going to be using some of the poster board from a Dollar Tree. And I'm going to be painting it a very dark navy blue color, almost black. I am going to be recreating this art piece from Kirkland's that I found last year. And I'm going to be using inexpensive paint that I had on hand. Now obviously you can always buy a dark colored poster board and skip this step. The next thing I did was design the wording on my Cricut. If you have a Cricut, you can totally do this, or you can always just use ready-made large stickers that you can find at your local Dollar Tree. I cut them out, weeded them, and then I placed them on the center of my poster board. When I made sure that everything was centered, I went ahead and pulled off the transfer tape. And then gathering some acrylic paint that I had on hand, I began to add the florals and the stems throughout the surrounding areas of the sign. You don't need expensive acrylic paints for this, and your design, it doesn't have to be perfect. As you can see, I'm pretty much freehanding everything. Once I had enough greenery, I began to add the poinsettias as well as the berries throughout. Once I was done with my painting, I just took a frame that I had on hand. I had painted it white and distressed it, and all I needed to do was add this poster board onto the back of it. I did add a piece of foam board in order to strengthen it as well. And that was it for this DIY. So for this next DIY, this was actually inspired by my friend Simply Home with Sherry herself. And it's basically just these little baskets that I got at Goodwill. I got the one with a handle for 99 cents, and I actually got the other one without handles for nothing because it was broken and the guy just gave it to me at the store. And so the first thing I did was remove the top little piece of the handle that was still there, and I just took some wire cutters and cut them down. And then what I did was I added a little bit of stain so that you could not see the lighter color, and it would kind of camouflage that little old handle that used to be there. Now I'm going to be using this glass bowl as well as an apothecary that I purchased at the thrift store as well. So this is going to be a very inexpensive DIY if you are on a budget this year. Next, I'm going to take some white sand from Dollar Tree and I am going to pour it inside of the glass bowl. I will end up using 2 of these bags for this one. Next, I am going to use a flameless candle as well as a Christmas pick and put it inside of the bowl on top of the sand. And I am going to repeat the same process with the smaller basket. For this next DIY, I'm going to be using this little snow globe that I found at Target Dollar Spot last year, and I'm hoping that they bring something similar this year as well. It costs $5 and it is completely made out of glass, so it's nice and heavy. Now you can totally leave it white if that's more your style, but at the time I did want to spray paint it this very nice antique gold to give it a more high-end look. Now I wasn't planning on adding any water because usually that just creates a hot mess. So what I'm doing here is cutting down some floral foam and then adding this little washcloth from Dollar Tree as well, and just surrounding it to make it look like a snowy bottom. Next, I took some of these little trees that I had used for a previous DIY, and all I did was cut the bottom base smaller so that it could fit inside of this snow globe. Then after putting it in the snow globe, I added a little bit more fake snow throughout the bottom of the trees. No, he wouldn't miss this. I put the snow globe back on, and then I added a blue ribbon to match my current decor. And that was it for this DIY. Now sometimes we just want to decorate with something that's a little bit more versatile and can be used for several occasions. And sometimes all you need to do is find a spectacular thrifted candelabra. This one happened to be from Crate and Barrel, and I found it for $3.99 at my local Goodwill. Now this is going to be a pretty simple update. I'm going to remove all of these tops of these candle holders. Now I thought I could clean them, but unfortunately this stuff was not coming off, so I had to resort to spray painting them. I took some of that antique gold again and began to spray paint all of the brass parts of the candle holder. Once those were completely dry, I came back and I taped around the areas that I had already painted. I took the candelabra outside, and with some primer as well as some white gloss spray paint, I gave it a makeover. Then once that paint was dry, I removed all of the painter's tape and added the tops of those candle holders again. Then all you do is add some candles that will complement your color scheme for the year, and that is it. We can hang out on the beach without freezing. Yeah, isn't that amazing? In Christmas times, we'll be chilling and having a good time. Doesn't matter if the snow is falling or the wind blows and the rain is pouring. So this next DIY is going to be a little bit more complicated, and it will require the use of a sewing machine. But if you've ever been like me and have been looking for the perfect stockings to match your current color scheme and can't find it, well, it's time to learn how to make your own, and this is how you do it. So I used my stockings from last year, and as I'm cutting this fabric is actually doubled on itself, and I'm making sure that the pattern in the front matches the pattern in the back. So if there's a green stripe in the front, there's also a green stripe in the back when I sew it, so I can at least have nice little seams all around. Now, after I cut them out, I took my rotary blade to cut out the pattern a little bit tighter around the stockings, also giving me that seam allowance that I need. Now this little thing is one of the best things to have when you're cutting fabric, especially when you have little curves just like this. Now I wanted these stockings to have that furry top part of the stocking, and my husband actually picked this fabric when we were together at Hobby Lobby. It has like a faux leather on one side and then the fluffiness on the other. I didn't need that much of this, and I think I honestly got like what was remaining on the bolt. I cut them down to the desired length that I wanted them, and then I placed them on top of each of the stockings, and then of course cut them down to size. Now, when it comes to creating multiple things like this, it is always to have everything pre-cut first, and then you can start sewing everything together. Now, this step you don't have to follow, but I am doing it because this tartan fabric is very flimsy, and I didn't kind of want my stockings to hang with no shape at all whatsoever. So I had this batting, and it's actually bonded batting. It's just what I had on hand, so I decided to go ahead and use it. And what I did was I cut one piece per stocking. You could very well double this up, but it's not really necessary. I just found that, I kind of want to see the form and shape of it. And again, this was just very soft, flimsy fabric, and I thought this was just a nice extra step to give it a more stiffer look. Now, again, this one was iron on, so I did have to iron on each of them. But if you don't have this type, you can always sew it on. All right, it's time to assemble. And as you can see here, I have the one with batting on top of the part of the stocking that's furry, but it's facing in. The inside part is actually facing to the outside, because remember, we're flipping this over. So I just laid it right on top, and I'm about to stitch these together just like this. And just a disclaimer, I am not a professional seamstress. I am probably making some mistakes here. It's totally fine. This is just what I found to help me, and I was trying to make this as simple as possible for anyone else who wanted to try this. Okay, so if you have been following me on Instagram, this is the project that really gave me so many headaches. So I went through all the headaches for you so that you don't have to. So pay attention. All right, so this is how you attach these two correctly. It's a little tricky because you're going to have the right side of the furry part facing you, but it's actually the inside of the stocking. So if you have batting, make sure it's facing out, and I just faced that one down on the table. And then the other one facing out to you. Now, the furry part needs to be facing you, and the inside wrong part needs to be facing inside, but the inside of the stockings are the right sides that go out. I hope that made sense. Okay, so next you're going to be pinning down the bottom portion of the stocking. You're going to start sewing underneath that furry top for the stocking, and you're going to go all the way around. All right, the reason you stop just underneath the furry part is if I would have taken that seam all the way up, you would flip over the stocking, and then when you flipped the furry part back over onto itself, you would see this part on the outside, and you don't want that. So in order to have it look the right way, you're going to have to flip that stocking over right side out, just like this, but then you're going to have to flip out those seams at the top and then sew them down this way. Now, once those are sewn together, this is a good time to make sure to trim both of those ends. That way they are both the same lengths all the way around. Now, the good thing about this kind of fabric is that you don't need to do a seam at the very end because it doesn't fray. And if you do cut some pieces off the end of it, you can go back and sew those little ends together so that they don't come apart. Finally, the last thing you want to do is remove any excess seam allowance that you may have. You want to get it as tight as possible so that when you flip it over, you get those nice crisp edges on your stocking on the exterior. Flip your stocking right side out and cut any excess fabric on the top furry part of your stocking. The last thing you need to do is add a little hook so that you can hang it. And all I did was take some regular ribbon. I put it in the center of the back seam, pinned it down, and then sewed it right on. And that is how you create stockings with a nice furry top. All right, you guys know I'm a sucker for napkin rings, and I had to try this out. I saw something similar on Pinterest, and I wanted to see if it would work. What you see here is some plaster of Paris, which is 2 parts plaster, 1 part cold water. And I just have it here on the bowl right now, just kind of soaking in. And I'm going to let that sit for a minute while I get started on my flowers. Now, these are little poinsettias that I had from some leftover bushes from a Dollar Tree. And what I did was take the entire flower apart. After letting the plaster of Paris sit for a little bit, I took a popsicle stick and began to stir it to make it nice and smooth. Then I took one of the flowers and submerged it into the plaster of Paris, making sure I covered all of its surface. I took off any excess of the plaster of Paris, and then I set it to dry. And then I repeated the same thing over with the rest of the flower pieces, making sure that everything was covered and that not too much plaster of Paris remained on the petals after I submerged it. And sometimes I would just wring it off like this to get the excess off, and I actually thought that that worked better. I would smooth it off with my fingers and then I would place it to dry. Now, this is something that gets quite messy, so if you don't mind getting messy, this is something definitely I think you should try. Now, when I set these to dry, I kind of wanted to raise the petals. I didn't want them to be completely flat because once they dried stiff like this, I wanted them to have a little bit of dimension. Now, as you can see, I did dip the stems into the plaster of Paris, but later on I winded up not using them because the plaster of Paris came off the plastic really easily and wouldn't stay on. Now, while they were still a little wet, I did not show this part, but I did make sure that the holes on the center of the petals were still open. And as you can see here, I have 2 of the petals and the plastic stem without any plaster of Paris on it. And I went ahead, put them together, and with a little bit of hot glue, I made sure to affix the stem onto the flower. Then I cut the excess stem off, added a little bit more hot glue, and adhered the wooden ring onto the bottom for the napkin ring. And then I continued to do the same to the rest. The last step was I took some crystal clear enamel, and the only one I had a glossy finish, so I went ahead and used that. And I just coated them so that I can protect the finish and I wouldn't have any of the plaster fall off or get onto any of my napkins when in use. And that was it for this DIY. This is how they turned out. Alright, so if you're trying to save money this year on Christmas decor, don't forget about your thrift stores. They have great items that you can always repurpose for holiday decor, like these topiaries that I found for only $2.99 a piece. Now, they're not very pretty, I'm gonna admit it, but their vases are super and their stems are perfectly fine. So what I did was I removed the lemons from them, and my main goal is to use the styrofoam that is already on them.
Waiting for Santa tonight. He climbs down the chimney at the speed of light.
Now, I'll admit, once I took those lemons off, those styrofoam balls looked pretty sad. So I took some green paint in order to minimize the white, and I'll be adding greenery to this, but I wanted to make sure you don't see any white styrofoam through any greenery. Now, I had this grid that I got on clearance from Michael's. Can't remember how much it cost, but I thought this would be perfect. And then I had these leftover picks from Dollar Tree, I believe, and I'm going to use these up as well. Now, for projects like these, it is always best to look into your stash and see what you have left over from previous years. It is a perfect time to use up some of that leftover greenery that you may have on hand. Now, the first thing I did was use up that greenery square that I had. And what I did was I just started removing them in little bunches. As you see here, I added hot glue to each of the tips and then I inserted it inside the styrofoam balls so that they would not fall out. And if I needed a little bit of help, I would take a mini screwdriver and poke a hole first and then insert my greenery. Once I was done adding all of the greenery to the topiary ball, I would come in and I would add the red berries throughout in the same way. Once the tops of the topiaries were done, I came in with some light and dark gray paint that I just kind of mixed together to get the right color consistency, and I began to paint the bases of the topiaries. Now, I didn't really care for the terracotta look, so I was going more for a cement urn look, and that is why I am painting it this color. This is chalky paint so that it does look more like cement, and it has a nice flat finish. Then, since the moss that it currently had was looking a little sparse, I just filled it in several areas with some Dollar Tree moss that I had on hand. And that was it for this transformation. And if you had to guess, you would guess that these now reside at my mom's house. Okay, so I had to include this in this video because these are the most unexpected Christmas DIYs ever. And I'm using these little wood curl roses from a Dollar Tree. I saw these and I immediately knew that I could make these little mini trees out of them. So I sorted them and then I began stacking them from largest on the bottom to smallest on the top. And then with some hot glue, I began to glue them together. And yes, it really is that easy. Just add a little bit of hot glue and place your next layer on top. And honestly, these just make the cutest little mini trees. You can put them in a jar, you can put them in a snow globe, you can even include these in little miniature villages if you wish. And all I'm doing here is putting them inside of this old candle jar that I had cleaned out. I added some sand, some greenery, and that was pretty much it for this. You can always place these right on your shelf or on a square that you can paint. You can also get these wooden squares from Dollar Tree and you can rise it up. This next DIY is going to be really simple to make. We're going to be using these ornaments that you can find at Dollar Tree, or you can use any clear ornaments that you might have on hand. First thing we're going to do is we're going to change the colors of these, and that's what I do like about these ornaments is that you can customize them to any color scheme that you want, especially if you have like a very unique color that you want to use for your season. Now I'm just using regular acrylic paint in a midnight blue. And all I'm doing is I'm moving it around until the entire ornament gets coated on the inside. Next, I want to customize these and I want to add words to the faces of the ornaments. Now I'm going to use my Cricut to create custom designs. And if you have a Cricut, I already have the SVG for these words saved on my website. All you have to do is access my free printables library and I'll make sure to link to that below. Now you can still do this even if you don't have a Cricut. You can use individual letters from stickers. You can also find Christmas themed word stickers already done, or you can always paint these on by hand using paint markers. The great thing about this is that it's completely customizable from the word to the color of the ornament. And that is all there is to this DIY. Now this next one's a little different because I'm going to show you how to make coquito, which is a very traditional Christmas Puerto Rican drink that looks like eggnog but isn't. And it's perfect if you want to give anyone a gift basket for Christmas. So what you'll need is 1 can of evaporated milk and 1 can of sweet condensed milk, 1 can of cream of coconut, or if you can't find the Coco Lopez brand, you can always use the one made by Goya. And please note, this is cream of coconut, not coconut milk. You'll also need vanilla and cinnamon. And of course, the star of the show, which is Bacardi Superior White Rum. You will need a blender for this, and all you need to do is combine your ingredients. I start with the coconut cream first, and then I add the sweetened condensed milk, making sure I scrape everything out of all of the cans. Then I add the evaporated milk, and then I measure out 1 cup of Bacardi white rum and add it to the mix. Next I add 1 teaspoon of vanilla and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. Next, you want to blend this for about 1 to 2 minutes to make sure everything is incorporated evenly. Make sure to store this in an airtight container. I like using these glass ones from IKEA. I make sure to close the container, and then I put it in the fridge for at least 4 hours or even overnight before it's ready to use. You do want to drink this chilled. Drink this as is, or if you're like my husband, add a little bit of an extra splash of Bacardi and enjoy. It is super creamy and such a delight to have. And this would be a great addition to add to a lovely gift basket for someone this season. For this next DIY, I'm going to be using these pillowcases that I bought at Hobby Lobby for 50% off. So each of these was $2.75. So you can't beat that. Usually I make my own, but this was totally worth it to buy them pre-made. Next, I'll be using some of this heavy duty ribbon that I also got for 50% off at Hobby Lobby. It's not really ribbon per se. It's more like those handles that you get on inexpensive burlap sacks, and it was perfect for this, I thought. And next I began to create the snowflake form on the front of the pillow cover. And I wasn't following any type of pattern. I was just kind of freehanding this and just making the little end pieces of the snowflake. Now I did end up making the actual pattern of the snowflake on the pillow cushion a little bit smaller than what you see here. Now whenever I create custom pillow cushion covers, I always sew them. However, these were already pre-made, and it was going to be a little bit hard to get the pillow cushion open and fitted through the sleeve of my sewing machine and then adhering all of these. So I decided to use some fabric glue for this. Not hot glue, fabric glue. And so as you saw, I started with the base pieces of the snowflake, and then I began to add the smaller little pieces at the ends. Each snowflake pillow cover only cost $4 to make because I already had that fabric glue left over. All you do is let the glue dry, and your pillow covers are complete.
To wish us all a Merry Christmas Day. Merry Christmas Day. A Merry Christmas Day. Oh.
Now, if you've been here a little while, you know that I love reusing and repurposing things that I already have on hand. Honestly, it's just great to use what we have so we can save a little bit of money. Now, I had this little stand that I had created a while back in this buffalo check pattern. I was no longer into this style, so I decided to sand it down, make it smooth, and redo it. Now, it looked good the way it was, but I wanted to add even more dimension to it. And I had these half round wood beads, and I wanted to add it along the entire border. I placed them along the top, but I actually ended up putting them on the edge, as you see here, and I adhered them on with hot glue. Then I took some DIY paint in the color Sandy Blonde, and I gave it a nice coat.
Let's go outside. We can hang out on the beach without.
Once the paint was dry, I came in with some of DIY Paint clear wax so that I can seal it. And while the wax was still tacky, I added some white decrepit dust all over it, and then using a brush, I spread it around, making sure I got it in all of the crevices in order to give it dimension.
It will always be Christmas in my heart.
And then I wiped off the excess with a damp cloth. I thought I could use a little bit more white, so I did come back in with a fine brush and some white wax and just made sure that I got into all of those nooks and crannies. Then I made some simple yarn Christmas trees from poster board, the same way I made the ornaments for my Christmas tree last year. They're very easy to make and super inexpensive. I added a cloche, and this was a beautiful wintry display.
Blanket with the skyline painted in blue. Ooh, yeah, that's what we do. We'll be chilling and having a good time. Doesn't matter if the snow is falling or the wind blows and the rain is pouring. It will always be Christmas in my heart. But this year I wanna hang out with my friends and family.
Now for this next DIY, I'm going to make a beautiful round plaque for my front door, and you see these rounds all the time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stain part of this plaque. Now I'm using a wood tint because it doesn't have any odor, but you can use regular stain or just water down paint. Then I'm going to take some washi tape and I am going to section off the bottom and paint it white. Of course, you can paint this any color you want, or you can just leave the entire thing fully stained. Now I like to pull the tape when the paint is still a little tacky. Now for the front, you can add Merry Christmas, but I decided to create a custom Feliz Navidad for it, and I did it with my Cricut. Again, if you want to use pre-made stick-on letters, or if you wish to hand paint this yourself, that is definitely another way you can recreate this. Now, as far as placement of the lettering, I placed Feliz on the stained portion of the wood round and the Navidad on the white. I wanted to leave empty space on the top because I'm going to be adding a bow and some details. Now I'm just using a navy and gold ribbon for this, and it is wired. I am just putting 3 pieces together, and with a wire I am going to be tightening it up and just fluffing it like this in order to create a nice full bow. Then I'm going to be adding just little pieces of pine and any leftover picks and pine cones that I have from previous years, and that is all there is to this DIY.
Christmas tree, hugging and kissing, just you and me. Carolers are singing outside our door, lovely songs we all heard before.
Okay, so these next ornaments I have been wanting to create for a while, and we're just taking some inexpensive Dollar Tree ornaments that you can get. They're plastic and non-shatterable. And what we're going to do is we're going to make these look old and vintage. And I got this idea from my friend Debbie over at Debbie's Design Diary. She did this a few years ago, and I have been wanting to try it, and I finally decided to do it. So what I'm doing here is I've got a couple of different molds from Iron Orchid Designs, and I am pressing down some air dry clay into the molds to create some beautiful scroll patterns for my ornaments. I wanted them to look like a set, so what I did was I used one pattern from the scrolls, and I used 2 pieces per each ornament. Now, while the air dryer was still malleable and not completely dry, I took some wood glue and spread it on the back of each of the little pieces that I had just created. I would put one underneath and then one over the top in opposite directions. And then once it was completely dry, I took some of DIY paint in White Swan and painted the entire ornament. Now, you're probably going to get a little bit of paint on your fingers. After the whole ornament is painted, I go in with my hair dryer to just speed up the paint drying process. Now, once the paint has been completely dried, I go in and I apply clear wax. Now, this is the DIY paint clear wax that I use on all my projects. And what this is going to do is it's going to serve as not only a protecting layer for the paint, but I'm going to be adding another level of texture, so I need to have this before I go on to the next step. And while that wax is still tacky, I am going to go in then, oops, I had a little bit too much of the dark decrepit dust. And I'm just going to work the decrepit dust into all of the nooks and crannies. And next I came in with a damp lint-free cloth, and I just began to remove some of that decrepit dust. Now, I did add a little bit too much from the beginning when I had that spill on it, but this is kind of the look I'm going for here, which is a little bit lighter. And as you can see, it just gives it this beautiful aged look. Now, I did end up making another set of ornaments. This time I used these leaves, and this time I ended up putting them on green ornaments, and I'm going to paint the entire ornament, including the leaf, green. And I am using the color Gypsy Green for these ones. It's a color that I have used quite a bit this year for lots of different projects. And since this is a darker color, I decided to do a light dust, and I came in with the white, doing the same thing that I did with the earlier ornaments and just filling in all of those little crevices on the surface of the ornament. And here you can see the difference between the ornaments. The one on the left only has the paint, and the one on the right has the wax as well as the decrepit dust on top. I repeated the same steps with the rest of the ornaments, and then I took some raffia ribbon and used that to hang them, and here is how they turned out. So for this next DIY, we're going to be using these garden towers that I got at my local Dollar Tree, as well as some raffia ribbon that I got from Amazon. Now, For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to share how to make the easiest one, but I did create 3 different patterns and the rest took quite a bit of time. So I will link to that tutorial if you guys want to check it out for the more comprehensive, more complicated trees. But for this one, we're just going to be taking it from the very top and wrapping that raffia ribbon all the way down the garden tower. Now, to ensure the best coverage, you're going to want to take your time and go down, pulling taut on the raffia and making sure that there's not much space in between. That way you don't see much through each of the different layers. Adding hot glue here and there as you go to keep the raffia ribbon in place. That way this does not unravel on you. Now, you don't always have to use raffia. You can use ribbon or you can use yarn. There's so many possibilities with this. Just make sure that once you get to the bottom, you also cover that very bottom ring so that you don't see any of the green wire. And that is all there is to making that Christmas tree. Now, as you can see, there are other ones. And again, I will have that linked below. Alright, so we're going to be reusing some of what we already have. And I picked up these scrapbook papers at my local Hobby Lobby. I had this frame that I had done quite a while ago for my first daughter's nursery, and I was no longer using it. So I decided to add some gold in order to give it a more vintage look. Now, if this isn't your style, you can always recreate this yourself using the colors that you like to use in your home for the Christmas season. And sometimes I do think it's nice to add a frame to a wall or a shelf in order to add more to the Christmas theme when we decorate our homes. So this is the perfect situation for this. I used the scrapbook paper that was already in the frame in order to cut out my new scrapbook paper to make it fit. Then I found these free printables online with pine and holly, and I cut them down to about a 4x6 size. Now, in order to add these onto the scrapbook paper, I decided to use round raised sticky tabs so that it would give it a little bit more dimension when looking at it. And that is all there is to it. All right, so I really wanted to try something new for you guys this year and for myself, I'm not gonna lie. And I decided to try air dry clay for the very first time. I ordered these off of Debbie's Design Diaries DIY a Go-Go website. I had been eyeing these for a little bit and I just wanted to try them. So this is a mold for air clay, and the first thing you do is add a little bit of cornstarch to it and brush it in through all the little creases because you don't want the air clay to stick. And then you pull the air clay out and start modeling it with your fingers, getting it a little bit soft, and then you press it into the molds. Now, I was looking for a more old world, traditional yet elegant feel this year, and I thought, what if I made some really adorable looking frames for my Christmas tree? And I think you guys are going to like how these turned out. Now, I used this little scraper that I had to remove any excess off and cut off the end pieces. It took me a couple of tries, I'm not going to lie, but after you get the gist of it, it gets easier and easier. Then once you're done pressing down your mold, you remove or peel back the silicone tray from your frame. Now, these were so much fun to work with, and I was kind of excited because this is something new that I hadn't tried before, and honestly, this would give me something really unique to add to my decor for Christmas this year.
Here we go. All right. Now this Christmas, we're gonna dance. We're gonna dance.
Next, all you do is find some free printables of landscapes or any kind of scenery that you want online for your Christmas theme and cut them down to size in order to fit inside of these little mini frames. Now, before I did anything with the print, I needed to paint these first, and I use Treasure Gold by Plaid. This is a highly pigmented acrylic paint that looks absolutely stunning when you paint it on. So I painted each of the little frames gold, making them look like antique gold frames. And then once they were dry, I used Mod Podge to add the little pictures or paintings onto the center of the frame. Now, the center of the frame isn't completely flat. It does kind of have like a little, I guess, higher up bump in the center, and it goes down on the corners. And so it will wrinkle a little bit if you try this, but I thought it just added to the antique little look that I was going for anyways. After those dried, the only thing left to do was add little ribbons to the backs in order to hang them on the Christmas tree. And these are some of the most adorable little ornaments I think I've ever made.
Christmas lights are all around. I can see them now. It's like they spell your name. It's insane. Now we're back here once again.
Well, that is it for this week's roundup of Christmas inspiration. I hope you enjoyed it, and I have a ton more of other videos with even more DIYs and ideas for your holiday decorating. So if you want to check those out, I am going to go ahead and put the playlist of all of my Christmas videos below so that you can easily check them out. I have a lot of different decor ideas from over the years that can work any time, any year, and I hope you check them out. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit like and subscribe so that you too can become a part of the familia and continue getting more videos your way. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I will see you all next week with another home decor and DIY video. Until then, adios.